Good afternoon and welcome to the AGO. I'm Stephan Jost, the Michael and Sonja Koerner Director and CEO of the Art Gallery of Ontario. This afternoon, I've got Stephanie Stebich, who's the Director of Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, D.C., as well as the Renwick Gallery in Washington, D.C., joining us. We like to begin these events by acknowledging we're on the traditional territory of the Mississauga of the New Credit, which has also been home to the Huron-Wendat and Haudenosaunee people through time. I'm glad you all have joined us today on Zoom. We tend to have about 1,000 people joining these conversations, and we are very grateful to receive support from TD's The Ready Commitment. Toronto-Dominion Bank has been really very, very important to make sure that we have meaningful conversations in Canada, particularly during these periods. So thank you. A couple upcoming events that are coming on. We've got the director of the Tate in London joining us, and Linda Henderson will be joining us, and she is the director at the Newark Museum as well. So please continue to enjoy these events. Today's format is really simple. We chat. That's what we're going to do today. We're going to speak for about 25-30 minutes. You can add questions, and Annie and Kathleen are off screen, and they'll take your questions and format them for us. So please join the conversation. And if you missed this and you want somebody to hear about it, that's fine. We'll be posting these on AGO.ca. We have a lot of events on AGO.ca, and so just join us there. Today was a great day for the AGO. We reopened to our public. So it's open to our 240,000 members and annual pass holders. We're keeping capacity quite low at 75 people per half an hour. It was fully booked today. So that was nice, and masks are required. But do go on at AGO.ca and get your ticket because the slots are filling out quickly. So Stephanie, welcome to Toronto.
Thank you, and congratulations on reopening. It's something that we at the Smithsonian still dream about with our 19 museums.
Well, we're more than happy to share our plans. They did a ton of work, and there's lots of little details. It's a lot easier to close a museum than reopen one, it turns out.
Yeah, we have practiced reopening since we've had some government shutdowns, but this is a whole new challenge.
Do you guys have a target date for that?
The Smithsonian is the world's largest museum, education, and research center, and we have 19 museums. Obviously, most in the nation's capital, and then 2 in New York, the Cooper Hewitt, and the second National Museum of American Indian. We have research facilities in Panama and Florida and Cambridge. So reopening is complicated because of all the local health issues and jurisdictions. We are thinking that we're going to go in a sort of staggered approach. So 2 first, likely also the ones that are easiest in some ways, the National Zoo, and then Udvar-Hazy, which is our second Air and Space Museum. We at American Art and the Renwick, we are in the second grouping of museums. Dates are still to be determined, but the secretary has said he'd like to see us all reopened by Labor Day. So that's early September.
That would be great. I think there are safe ways to do that. And, but of course you have to look at local health conditions. How do you describe your museum? It's a remarkable, I should say museums, right? It's a remarkable couple museums there. How do you kind of generally describe it to somebody who's never been there?
Well, thank you. I know you've been there, Stephan, so you can chime in for some incredible feature that I've missed. So just the buildings themselves, because you have, of course, such a beautiful building, and the Gehry renovation and addition is so beautiful. I sit in 2 historic landmark buildings. The American Art Museum is in the old patent office. It was the 3rd federal building constructed after the US Capitol and the White House. Why would a patent office be so terribly important? American ingenuity. It was a grand building, 2 city blocks long, with a beautiful courtyard in the middle, which is now enclosed, the Kogod courtyard, much beloved. And the building originally was filled with shelving with all these little miniature patent models. Again, Singer sewing machine and cotton gin and all kinds of better mousetraps, all those kinds of delightful things. We still have some of them on view. So that's our main building, which is also shared with the National Portrait Gallery and the Archives of American Art. And that building sees over 2 million visitors a year, 200,000 visitors a month. It's, it's staggering.
It's among the most visited art museums in
Yes, among the top 5 in the
Yes.
country. Free, and then we have unusual hours and days. We're open every single day of the year except Christmas. And we open later, 11:30. It allows us to bring special guests like school children in the morning and do some housekeeping. And then we're open till 7 o'clock because we're in a very lively restaurant neighborhood and people know to come by at night.
Are the other Smithsonians open 7 days a week?
No. They have bankers' hours, so we have a field advantage as well.
Got it.
My other building, the Renwick Gallery, is again also historic and named after James Renwick Jr., an architect. That's unusual to have buildings named for an architect. He also notably built the Smithsonian Castle, which is sort of iconic. That was for his private collection, and then he decamped to a larger building, which became the Koerner Museum. In 1972, after the good efforts of Jackie Kennedy to secure Lafayette Square, which was supposed to be renewed with, of course, parking lots. It's the thinking of urban renewal at the time. Anyway, it was turned over by President Lyndon B. Johnson to become the first National Museum of American Craft.
So it's right by Lafayette Square. So a couple weeks ago, there was some activity in the neighborhood. Yes.
Well, June 1st was the most notable day of the protests, as you may remember. Peaceful protests, I would emphasize. The Renwick has very good neighbors. The White House a block away, the Eisenhower Executive Office across the way, and the Secret Service right behind us. Actually, that building is modeled very much on ours in terms of a red brick facade and mansard roof. The building is much loved, and the museum and all we do there. So we didn't expect anything to happen. We have security in the building, and it was all very peaceful. I would say we had good karma because your delightful work by Christy Belcourt for the Hearts of Our People, Native American Women show was on the banner on the outside. So maybe some Canadian art karma helped us.
It's an extraordinary piece, and it's on loan, and we're really pleased at how the exhibition that's traveling, is really, people are noticing her work and seeing her work, and many for the first time. So it's
indeed, and because I'm doing this interview, you're extending the loan, so I'm most appreciative.
Yes, of course. We were just kidding before. This is how things get actually negotiated.
The show is actually frozen in the museum, as we all have been through this, and but we've got an extension, so it'll be away a little longer from your museum. So thank you.
It's fine. Everybody is playing in the field, which is nice to allow it to happen. What's a work of art in your collection now that you're kind of drawing inspiration from? It's a massive collection, but what's kind of really touching you during this time?
Yes, well, just to have another Smithsonian moment, the Smithsonian has 154 million objects. Now, most of those are bugs and rocks and things like that. For my art collection, I don't know how large your collections are, Stephan, but we have about 45,000 works of art.
Okay, we're at about 100, so it's growing. It's grown a lot in the last decades.
Yeah, and you have a world perspective, world collecting. We have a focus on American art over the last 300 years, from sort of folk art to photography and time-based media. Work of art, well, I've been looking at one work of art a lot recently. That would be the powerful video, 7 minutes long, by Arthur Jafa, J-A-F-A, called The Love is the Message is Death, which is this incredible collage of YouTube videos, Dr. King's speeches, religious ceremonies, life on the street, kind of Black America. And it was a piece that we were delighted to be able to purchase with our sister museum, the Hirshhorn, a few years ago. And it really speaks to this time of unrest and protest and racial inequities.
You did a great project with that piece. Tell us a little bit about it, because it really kind of hit home.
Yes, thank you. I've been watching it a lot because we've been live streaming it too for 48 hours with 13 other museums, from the Tate to museums like Los Angeles County Museum of Art. We had 127,000 people watch the video across 159 countries. And we had a special hashtag for it, which was retweeted and seen by 17 million people. So it was an opportunity to have art lead the way in having important conversations about race in American history.
What kind of impact do you think the Black Lives Matter protests will have on the National Museum over the course of, say, the next 4 to 6 years? How do you imagine that actually playing? You create national narratives, right? So, it's a pretty important position you have.
Yes, well, I would say we are very fortunate to have a wonderful leader at the Smithsonian, the Secretary Lonnie Bunch, who has really challenged all of us in leadership to have greater relevance, greater reach, and greater impact in all we do. And there's a recent article where he was interviewed by the New York Times, where he really talks about museums having a social justice role, that I believe artists help us see the world differently. And he really talks about how museums have to help people handle complexity, have to understand and feel more comfortable with nuances in our world. And we do this obviously through objects and through history and science. So I'm optimistic that we as museums will pivot, and as museums did in the 60s and 70s and other moments of social unrest and important social movements, I think we're the better for it.
Yep. Yeah. It's gonna be a marathon though. There's so much that has to happen.
Indeed. How are things in Toronto in terms of Black Lives Matter and statues and monuments?
Yeah, well, it's active. Let's say that. It's actually been really a peaceful. I think it's been a watershed moment. I think it really has. And the history is different in Canada, but there was slavery in Canada. It was abolished earlier, but that's not a particularly strong moral ground, right? There is also a real active conversation about truth and reconciliation with the Indigenous communities that predates kind of this latest round of Black Lives Matter, but I think that I have a sense that at all levels of the organization, it's a serious and engaged conversation. And I think that it's gonna change who we are and how we do things.
And Stephan, we all have to admit museums are often late to the party, right? I mean, when did you start collecting Native Canadian artists at the AGO?
Yeah.
Often we saw those collections as not fine art, but anthropological.
Yes. I mean, many of the great collections of Indigenous Canadian art are actually in Ottawa, but it's not a great or clean story. There's a lot of work to do.
Yeah. One of my challenges, and I wonder how you do it, because we sit in cities where there's more than one museum, obviously. DC has plenty of museums that are private, aside from the free and public Smithsonian's. But how do I collect at the American Art Museum? How do I collect Native American art when there's a National Museum of American Indian?
Yeah, but you can't tell the story unless you have great works of art and significant presence, right?
Indeed. So we have a shared staff member, which is, I think, a new way of museums working. So we recently bought, and I would recommend to you, wonderful face masks designed by Native American women artists. And we bought three from 3 different artists. And let me tell you, paying artists during a pandemic is not an easy thing. So we had to work with a gallery, an intermediary. I'm grateful to Leslie Farron Gallery for doing that for us. And so those works are going to go out on view as soon as we reopen, again, trying to be more relevant and impactful. But we also, the American Indian Museum, bought several as well. And so we did that somewhat in concert, making sure we didn't have overlap. Yeah,
this past year we deaccessioned close to $1 million worth of kind of third tier group of 7 works, and 80–90% of that money has gone into buying contemporary Indigenous work. So that was a kind of a move, because if the work's not in your collection, you can't study it, you can't show it, you can't. And the truth is what our curators study and show very much impacts what people think is important. So we've been doing some active deaccessioning and buying, just reshaping the collection. We have incredible depth in some areas, and not necessarily of the quality. So you know.
And Stefan, do you transfer collections between museums? So, for example, there are collections that make more sense at my institution to
Yeah.
be transferred. We get government transfers when the National Endowment for the Arts does an art competition or something like that, or the General Services Administration that has public art.
Yeah, we're a little bit different structure. So, you know, we're not a federal museum, and we're not actually even a provincial museum. That we do get provincial funding. What they're called a direct transfer recipient. So basically, 21 of our $63 million budget comes from the province, but and the premier can appoint 10 of our 27 board members. But we essentially function as an independent organization, where our sister institution, the ROM, is actually part of the province. So we do occasionally transfer collections. We, for example, have a collection of a work by an artist named Varley. And Varley was a kind of a earlier 20th century artist. And we had a lot of his things that really should be at the Varley Museum, not here. So we transferred some stuff there because it wasn't going to be on, you know, it wasn't going to be ever on view here because we have great works by him, but there's a limited what we can show. So it's, yeah, it's different. How does it feel? This is the first time you're part of a large public museum, as in government funding, because your history is in Tacoma and in Cleveland and Minneapolis, which are all private museums, essentially. How's that different?
Well, I would say I thought of myself as a civic art museum kind of girl, you know, always the name of the city in front, although rarely was there much city money.
Yes.
The history of government funding for America is not quite the same as in Canada. I think you had an earlier start with your Canada Council for the Arts. I think you guys started in the 50s, and really in the United States, the major federal agencies, the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Institute of Museum Library Services were really founded in the 70s.
Yeah.
And our funding at the Smithsonian is a thing of wonder. 60% of my budget is public dollars. And so the other 40 really is private dollars with very limited ways where I earn income. I don't have any admission ticket. I don't have a membership. I don't have parking.
Yeah.
They have special events and then store sales. Nobody makes money on a cafe, I find.
Yeah. So tell me about your time in Tacoma, because it was an extraordinary period. Just tell people, because most people haven't been to Tacoma or know what you accomplished there. And I visited you there, and it was definitely, wow.
Yeah. Well, Stefan, we've known each other for a long time.
I mean, since our 20s. So
cataloging, we were both in Ohio for a golden moment, great museums in Ohio. I was in Cleveland and you were at Oberlin. And then I think you went to California, Mills. Let me see.
Yes, that's correct.
Then you, from California, you shifted across the country to Vermont.
Yep,
right?
exactly.
And just for something different, all the way to Hawaii.
Yes, and now I'm in Canada. So we both have gone, because you've gone from, well,
Ohio to Minnesota. Well, I started in New York, Ohio, Minnesota, Tacoma, Washington, where I thought I'd stay 4 to 6 years. I found myself involved in exciting things and ended up staying twice that, 12 years. Yeah. And then happily heading back east to.
But it was a museum of like little cities really can, right? Tacoma's not a huge city.
Yes. But... Well, Washington State is a fascinating place, a place I'd long admired. And it's always dangerous as a museum director to say, you know, that's a really nice community. Before you know, you end up working there. You know, your life direction. It's a museum that doesn't get much by way of city funding, although they recently thankfully passed a sales tax initiative. Again, funding for the arts is so different in our countries, you know, city, county, state, and federal funding. So they're getting a little bit more city money through a sales tax initiative. And it was, Tacoma was both the first city of the state, because that's where the Transcontinental Railway ended. So a big boom town there. And then became the second city when Seattle really blossomed. And so it was what timber barons collected, little French Impressionism and ashcan schools, before the museum made a smart move to really be a regional museum with kind of a national focus. And yeah, so I had a great time there. I added 2 wings, so major transformative gifts of $20 million and $14 million on a $5 million operating budget. That was
those are huge.
Yeah, but you have to deliver, right? When you get these kinds of gifts, you have to build wisely and also build with endowments. That's, I think, the thing that I worry most about in the museum field is we have a lot of museums that have had these big expansions, and it's tough to operate these ever larger institutions.
Yes, because you try to do it forever, and so it takes a great.
Yes, we're in the forever business, I like to say.
So I've known you for, again, a long time, since our 20s. It's been wonderful to watch you kind of progress in the field and end up at one of the largest museums in the US with a great, it's just super attendance. I see right now you're visiting your family's house in Western Massachusetts. The last time I was there was at your wedding, where you and your wife got married on the grounds there. And people probably don't realize that you're in a kind of a double museum director family.
Yes.
You have to kind of declare, we're not going to talk about museums at dinner. Do you have to do that, or do you guys just keep on talking?
When I married my wife some 4 years ago, she was the director of the American Folk Art Museum in New York, and it was quite the commute between New York City and Tacoma, Washington. So something had to give, and luckily I had the opportunity to come east, and then we did a kind of a New York to Washington, so from 2,500 miles to 250-mile commute, more or less. And then she stepped down there and now actually works in something complementary to what I do. She's at the National Endowment for the Humanities. Sadly, she cannot give me a government grant for the arts because I already get government monies, unless I can find a very special project where I can meet their mission in other ways. So she's been very busy recently. I don't know what the Canadians have done or continue to do to support the arts and arts institutions given the pandemic and economic challenges. But she recently gave $75 million away, special allotment.
Yeah.
Not enough.
I must say that the governments at all levels in Canada have been working very well together. And the strategy has been to actually what they call a federal wage subsidy. And what that means is during this period of pandemic, the government pays 75% of the first $58,000 of your salaries, whether it's public or private. So that means the incentive is really to keep people employed because you're paying 25 cents on the dollar. So that's for the first 58,000. So that's added actually a lot of stability to the system. And so people, some people can't work, but people are trying to keep them on, right? Because there's a real incentive for keeping people at their jobs employed because I think it's important. It's an insecure time, so security can be helpful. What we did at the AGO was we have a $20 million labor budget for every 6 months. 3 private donors stepped in with $5 million. Everybody on staff took a 25% wage cut. And then the government's wage subsidy also stepped in. So that's added some stability there. So
yeah, because the solutions throughout the United States have been very different. So at the Smithsonian, starting with the leadership, we all took a 10% pay cut. And then we keeping everybody on. The big challenge for us, of course, are older staff members with pre-existing conditions and also people of color, which are a lot of our, frankly, Office of Protection Services, our security staff. So we've seen a huge group of those folks really cannot come to work. We don't think it's wise for them to come to work. So we also have what we call a trust budget. Aside from our federal budget, there are trust dollars of, again, earned income, the store revenues and whatnot. We're going to take about a $50 million hit there. So we're already imagining what does new normal look like at the Smithsonian? We don't have a ticketing system. We are free, the doors open, there's a line to come in and people come in, and we're now going to adopt a ticketing system. This is ticketing system that we had to develop for the National Museum of African American History and Culture because the numbers were so extraordinary.
Got it.
So we're going to use that ticketing system, which also gives us a way to tell people what the rules are in terms of wearing masks and such in a post-COVID world. Also gives us contact information, so hopefully we can be in conversation with our visitors in the future. So stay tuned. That's still to be rolled.
Our annual pass, one of the good sides is, it's a barcode on your phone basically, and so that people can have touchless entry now. So that's been, and we know everybody in the building, right? So if there were to be a case, we could actually buy half-hour increments to say, okay, during this hour, somebody was in here who we want to let you know about, and please get tested or something like that. So.
And not to bore our audience or anything like that. We're spending a lot of time thinking about what hours should we open. Again, we're usually open 7 days a week.
Yeah.
11:30 to 7 o'clock. Is that right? Should we close on Mondays? That's a traditional day museums are closed. Should we close more days? Should we start with fewer hours and then add?
Yeah.
We have very large buildings, so we can actually accommodate a couple of thousand people,
Yeah.
Per
Yeah.
hour. So that's good. But we'll
the truth
see.
is, people want air conditioning too. It's hot there.
very, very hot. Except again, you have to imagine we have 21 million visitors or so, tourists a year to Washington, D.C. Many come to our museums. I would say 50% of our visitors are tourists, which actually is a good number, which means 50% are local. So I'm hoping those people come back. But I'm expecting about an 80% decline in attendance right when we open, and then maybe 20% each quarter. So it's a bit of a guessing game. We watch what's going on in Asia and Europe. And of course, now I'll watch closely what's going on.
Yeah. We're learning. We'll share the information. It's kind of, during this kind of whole pandemic, we have to rely on skills. What are some skills you find yourself relying on more than during normal times? What are some of the kind of things that you've found yourself going, ooh, I really have to do that?
Yes. Well, I think this is a time where you have to lead with the heart. I'm particularly proud of my director colleagues who've made difficult decisions to keep their staff on. Again, I know it's challenging. I don't have a ticket revenue. I don't have costs associating with collecting revenue. So I'm really in a much better position than my colleagues. However, we know that layoffs are really very detrimental psychologically. And if we can just reimagine our budgets, I sent all my curators back for haircuts for all their upcoming exhibitions. We've pulled in, as we say, we've gone under seat cushions and looked in pockets for every coin there is. And I would say our donors, I too have been doing interviews with my curators and such. And after the end of each call, across comes a check, checks of different sizes. And so people want to support museums during this perilous time. But so I think you have to lead with your heart. Then you have to bring your head into it. I think we have to over-communicate. It's a time where people are lacking leadership in many ways. We're uncertain about the science of all of this. In America, it's a patchwork of states and cities and municipalities. So a lot of people, different people to listen to. And museums are places that are often, we hope, the center of communities, and people miss coming together. So there's a lot of concern about the state of museums. So I spent a lot of time reassuring my staff, reassuring our public, we'll get through this. We'll be different. We'll be leaner after all. The economics of museums is the economic model is not a good model in most ways.
Not easy. So we talked a little bit about kind of narratives changing. You mentioned, that museums aren't actually necessarily ahead of the curve. They're often kind of quite conservative and kind of behind the curve. You've got a responsibility with your curators and your supporters to kind of create a narrative of American art and culture. What are the biggest challenges to changing that narrative, to updating it?
Usually the challenges are ourselves. We get in our own way with remembering what we learned in school, when we have to really remember what's going on today with artists and what other museums and scholars are thinking about and writing about. I feel very fortunate. Just before the pandemic, I announced that we would be spending time focusing on doing exhibitions from our own collection, much cheaper than these very expensive traveling shows. We also, as the National Museum, have our exhibitions on much longer, not 3 or 4 months, 6 months, 9 months. Again, so we have this very large attendance. So many people are serving, so we keep our exhibitions up longer. And we are making a big investment in reinstalling our whole collection. So we will be telling a different story about America, a more inclusive story. The democratic ideals, are we living up to them? Democratic with a small d, of course. The story of migration around the nation. Lots of different ways to look at American ingenuity, to think about, again, we have inspiration from the patent office. Artists come up with new processes when bronze pouring comes to America. lot of different ways to look at the collection. And again, I have 14 curators, and all focused on this American experience, which is what we try to tell.
So curatorial teams are undergoing shifts. We've started kind of having, I'd say, historically, we have not had particularly diverse voices on our curatorial team. We've made several shifts, which will continue. Can you talk a little bit about how, Black, Indigenous, people of color on your team have been changing or framing the conversation, curators, educators, et cetera?
Yes. Well, I would tell you that the Smithsonian is can sometimes be a slow-moving animal. That said, the way we create change is we launch initiatives or we set up centers. So it was not that long ago, just a few decades ago, that a very damning report came in written about the Smithsonian, and the title was Willful Neglect. And really the absence of telling the story, the incredible contributions of the Latino populations in America, really just not, there was poor representation among the staff and leadership, not a major collecting effort, the histories were not being told. So Congress, in their wisdom, funded a new center, the Smithsonian Latino Center. And one of their first initiatives was to say, look, American Art Museum, we do like a curator of Latino art. We'll pay for the first 4 years.
Yep.
Hire the best you can, and then you figure out how to pay for it. And so in those kinds of efforts, or in partnership, so my chief curator is a Latina woman, and she's extraordinary. And she's really writing whole new chapters in American art and doing a show. Sometimes you got to get lucky, Stephan, with your scheduling. My fall exhibition is called Printing the Revolution, the rise and impact of Chicano graphics, 1965 to today.
Great.
And the challenges of 65 are still with us today. And so there's an Asian American Pacific Center. So we are partnering with them to build collections. They're a non-collecting institution, so they're going to give me maybe a couple, significant funding to both buy works of art for my collections that they could then borrow in the future, and also paying my support costs. So those are the kinds of ways we make change. And last little note, I have, aside from running 2 museums, I wear another hat. I'm the co-chair of something called the American Women's History Initiative.
Oh, yeah. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, we're just celebrating, or not celebrating, given all that's going on, the centennial of women's suffrage in our country. And there is an effort afoot to create a new museum of American women's history. It's not something the Smithsonian advocates for. That would be decided by Congress. They would have to pass the legislation, hopefully with some funding and some land and whatnot, and would likely be administered by the Smithsonian. So in preparation for the possibility there may be a museum on this topic, we've launched a 5-year, $25 million initiative.
Got it.
And we do something called pool funds. And so $1 million, submit your best proposals for buying works of art. Or historical objects, or scientific elements, or major exhibitions or public programming. And we also have now seated some, almost a dozen curators throughout the Smithsonian dealing with women's history.
Fantastic.
And we put together a joint proposal with the American Indian Museum and the Renwick. So now we're looking at Native American women's craft. Fabulous.
Right, super.
That's hard to convince a donor to do that. So it's forward thinking, but it's often because we are behind.
And it's how you change the institutions through these special initiatives.
Yes, and they're they're large, they're eye catching. The secretary just negotiated a fabulous gift, funding $25 million from Bank of America, and we're looking to raise more money to have an initiative on race, community, and our shared future in America. Yeah. And 2/3 of the money will be spent serving the nation, and 1/3 will be bolstering the resources of the Smithsonian. So these are incredibly important national initiatives.
How is it to move from Tacoma, where you're 12 years, you're really running the show, right? To Smithsonian, where there's probably a lot of kind of peer buy-in and a lot of kind of massaging bureaucracies and understanding the process. How did you adjust to that?
It does take some adjusting. I have terrific colleagues, so I'm often asked them for their wisdom. I actually came in with a wave of a lot of new directors,
Okay.
certainly a bigger effort to diversify the ranks. I was not the first woman director of the American Art Museum. My predecessor, Betsy Bruin, was that, and for a long time was one of the few women directors at the Smithsonian.
Yeah.
But after me came the first female director of the Air and Space Museum, Ellen Stofan, first female director of American History Museum, Andrea Hartig. So, you know, a lot of change at the top. And I would say we are ambitious and we are impatient.
Good.
And we're looking to move things quickly.
Make things happen.
Yeah.
So we're hitting our time here. I've managed to weave in a bunch of questions here. But I want to just end with a work of art that you and Anne both love, that you live with.
Well, that's a little hard. My wife is an architectural historian from the 18th century, and Italian is her focus. And I'm really more of a modern art museum. So we really try to agree on when she brings in her prints of Rome, and I bring in folk art, like a book trailer drawing. We have very eclectic taste. It's
so tell us about the work right behind.
We actually don't buy art together. We
okay, got it. Yeah,
it comes home, and then is it in your office or?
Well, tell us
actually,
about.
We do have a favorite work. Actually, we have a wonderful print of a quilt by G. Spend Quilter. So that's in the South. These wonderful geometric. That hangs in our dining room in a place.
Wonderful.
Entertaining.
And tell us quickly about the work behind you. We'd be remiss.
Yes, Rick Bartow, a Native American artist, and an eagle head. I figured, you know, with our 4th of July coming up, and again, candidate for you, I thought it made for a good backdrop.
All right. Okay. And on that note, we're going to end the conversation. I just want to thank you very, very much. And I wish you all the best at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. And please do visit us again here. We'd love to.
I will.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.